Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the live stream studio. And today we have a first for Superweek TV. We have a guest in the studio who is not at Superweek. So hope the technology will not fail of us. I have Glenn Vanderlinden via Zoom with me. So let's switch to Glenn. Let's see if the technology works. Glenn, you here?
I can hear you perfectly.
I see you on the stream. Great. So,
okay, amazing.
Glenn is the co-founder of Human37, a analytics agency. Well, I'll let you introduce it, right? Because what are you? An analytics agency? Would you classify yourself as that?
We call it like a data consultancy, let's say. We help organizations build their data strategy and also like roll it out. So we do more than just build slide decks. And we also do more than just implement, right? So we kind of like do end-to-end analytics implementations, focus on customer data mostly.
Nice. So starting off with the most important question, what is your reason for not being at Superweek? Why do I have to call you via Zoom?
Yeah, it's a good question. I kind of got late on the timeline. And by that time, I actually got booked in for a half-day workshop with one of my clients, which had the entire team at the table. So yesterday I was leading a workshop of, I believe, 12 people.
Okay.
So I could not do it over Zoom. So that's my valid excuse, I guess, but I'll try to rectify it by next year.
Yeah. This is official, documented. We'll see you next year at Superweek. So the reason we're calling you is Fosca, my co-host, was attending Magic Camp Brussels, and you were also attending, and you gave a talk about synthetic data. And Fosca said, we need to have Glenn to talk about this topic because it opened so many doors. It's such an interesting concept. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about synthetic data. But I know there's many ways to apply it, but it originated from a story within your company. So let's start there. How did you guys stumble upon the idea, and what did you do first?
So basically, let's start with the idea of synthetic data. Synthetic data is basically data that looks like real data, but is not, right? And since we have our hands on, or we work with customers who process a lot of customer data, we're very deep in data warehousing, customer data platforms, and analytics such as GA4, Mixpanel, Amplitude is one of the destinations, let's say, in which we analyze that data. But it also means that a lot of people might access that data. And because it's very sensitive data, we're looking into alternative ways to have our teams trained or potentially do demos for clients to make them understand very tangible what a specific implementation or the implementation of a user story would look like and what it what they would be able to do with that implementation. And so the best practice for that is actually to show rather than tell, but it's quite problematic if you're dealing with very sensitive data and actual customer data because we're very focused on privacy. So we started looking into how can we mimic all of this. And so originally we have all of our sandboxes where we can test and we can train and we can send in whatever stuff that we want to do. But typically when you generate users and you apply attributes or profile properties or whatever you want to call them, you need to have some sort of consistency across the journey, etc. And you want to generate like pretty high volumes to at least give like an idea of what it could look like, not on a single customer journey, but like this is what a funnel could look like. This is how it enters your customer data warehouse, these type of things. Yep. And so we had one of our clients who actually used synthetic data for pen testing or for unit testing. And we started elaborating the idea from there. And so now we basically built our own mini package. It's more of a script, actually, that allows us to mimic customer journeys, generate fake users by the thousands in a few seconds, and actually allows our teams to train, but also to test a bunch of stuff and to demo a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. So that use case makes a lot of sense, right? Preferably you would never expose sensitive data, but especially like when training people, there's you could argue there's even added risk with new people in the company. Exactly. So it makes life easier. It also makes life easier for you as an agency, right? You want to ramp up people, you want to expose them to interesting stuff without the risk. So what has been the response so far, like within the team, training people, like actually using it, putting it into practice? How did it go?
A lot of the people in the team actually use it in order to like validate certain use cases. We have customers who want to try to track a specific customer journey. What we basically do is we amend the script to generate a few thousands of users. We paste in theoretical attributes that they want to track. We generate fake values, and then we ship it into a destination. And so they have an understanding of like, this is the user story I would like to build, and this is what it will look like in the end. Does it correspond to what I'm actually doing, or what I want to know, or do I need to refine the question? That's one thing. So versus our customer, it allows us to mimic certain things without introducing any risk. And for our teams, it's handy because there's always new features in specific platforms. So we sometimes need to load data sets into platforms to verify how specific things work, or how the report would visualize certain things, or how the module would treat the data, etc., etc. And we can easily mimic this by the synthetic data sets that we generate. So it's very easy for us to test new features or to increase our understanding of how specific tools treat the data once it's been accepted by the platform and how it's represented in specific reports.
So how do you deal with the like, because it's synthetic, you couldn't even call it inaccurate. It's non-existent, right? It is fake. How do you apply, like, how do you make sure that what you are doing is not going to have a negative effect, like with real data? Like, how do you account for those kind of situations, or do you try to?
Yeah, it's hard, I think, because usually today we use it a lot in like at the start of an analytics journey. So there's like very little risk because we just make assumptions, right? What's your current conversion rate? What do you have in mind? And we can apply the weights, and we can just say like, my conversion rate is 40%. So in between events, we have a progression rate of 40%. It's a parameter or a weight we put into the data set. And from there, you actually get, as if the law of large number applies, you basically get that 40% conversion rate distribution, right? It gets more tricky, I think, if you start elaborating on other usage cases or use cases or usages of synthetic data, which is potentially like, one of the things is algorithm training, right? For instance, for personalization or product recommendation, you need quite some data. There's this whole thing, should we train it on actual production data, yes or no, right?
Yeah.
If we understand what the general trends are in a data set, we can actually fairly simply replicate it. X% of people purchase product A, Y% of people purchase product B, and there's an overlap of X. We can actually replicate that data set without actually using all of the production data, because we make a synthetic copy of it. Like, we mirror it. It's not even mirroring. It's like we use the attributes of one data set and we transfer it into a newly generated data set that has nothing to do with these actual user identifiers, and then we could use it in order to load the data. We're not quite at that stage yet, but it's one of the use cases where you could think synthetic data might be useful.
I'm just thinking out loud here, right? So how much real data do you need to have enough synthetic data, right? Because let's take this to its extreme, right? Because synthetic data has a lot of advantages, like from a privacy point of view, right? It's not about real users, so amazing. All the restrictions don't apply. But you have to model it after real data, right? So you're gonna need a percentage of real data, and preferably, I would argue, a well-distributed sample of real data. So not only not only the users who consent, because there might be a significant difference between users who do and don't consent, so that might actually have its impact in the model data, or not.
Yeah, I think the whole thing is about not necessarily the way I think of it. And again, it's an idea that is developing, right? I'm not saying it's correct 100%. The way I think of it is, if you look at a data set has a number of characteristics. 100% of the data has a number of characteristics. There's a bunch of flags behind you. You could say like X% of the data is generated from region Y, from country A, from country B, from country C. That's a property or a parameter that you could transfer. When I generate users, I could say, okay, I want X amount of Dutch people, X amount of Belgians, X amount of British people. And so I could build that in the data set. And then I could potentially look deeper and say like, okay, of all the Belgian people, we see that conversion rate is 40%. Just give me, for this segment, a 40% conversion rate. For the people in the Netherlands, there's a 50% conversion rate. And for the people in Great Britain, there's a 60% conversion rate. And I can model all of that over. the thing is, like, I'm not using any real identifiers, right? Because all of the IDs and the anonymous IDs I'll generate in my dataset, they actually do not exist. So I'm trying to mimic these things based on specific characteristics that are anonymous enough, and then I'll let the dataset generate exactly, or at least characteristics of them, right? So I also think that the whole concept of synthetic data kind of is like when you do analytics at a aggregated level. It's not, I think, built for, and I'll come back to that later, currently in one-to-one understanding of analytics. But I do believe that there are some quite some use cases where you actually could apply it in order to further obscure the data and make it less specific to a person.
Yeah. Well, you opened the can of worms. Let's go down. Let's go down that rabbit hole, right? Because so the application for training, very obvious. You guys are actually doing it, right? So the value is shown, I would argue. What other applications do we have? What other applications do you potentially see?
Like one of the things I have in my head, and I've actually have a real MVP running in my sandbox, which is the whole concept of I think of analytics or an analytics hit that's being sent to a destination as a package, which contains a number of attributes or a number of parameters, whatever you want to call it, right? Yeah. There's like my IP, there's potentially my IP, there's my user agent, there's my anonymous ID, there's the page I'm on, there's the event I trigger, there's the parameters of the event, right? And so the way I think about analytics is, first of all, there's the concept of data minimization. Like, there's a difference between it's not because you can that you should. So technically I'm allowed, like, first I have consent. Let's go the easy route. I have consent and I can track specific things, but it doesn't necessarily mean I want to track everything that the user does, right? Even if I'm on a specific page, I don't want to track everything. I'm trying to figure out what are the things I need in order to solve my use case, right? So data minimization, tracking what you need. And then from there might be a couple of fields that are still tied to a person, that are like PII or pseudo PII, right? And the concept I'm thinking of is like, what if in that analytics package, I can either anonymize those things because I don't need them. Maybe the vendor requires me. I have mandatory fields that I need to send, maybe. Yeah. I can't really think of use cases. Or I want to introduce specific noise into a specific parameter. I'm taking IP. Not a very popular one, but it's like the proof of concept I have in my head, because there was a lot to do with IPs going to servers, etc., etc. And so what if I introduce a fake IP for 25% of my users? It means that 1 out of 4 users, the IP is actually wrong. Yeah. And by default, like, I'm not sure if that's the actual IP, but from an aggregate point of view, I can be certain that it's 75% correctly represented, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if IP is the right use case. I just tested it because it was easy for me to test, because I can look at my IP and then manage everything from there. Yeah. But it's actually one of these things I'm thinking about. Like, can we look into first, what is the data package we're sending? We minimize the data, only take what we need. In the package that we send, should we entirely reduce the fields that might be too personal? If we can minimize them and leave them out, should we like synthesize them entirely? Or should we synthesize a portion of the users from which we have consent to track to just introduce noise and kind of like introduce this level of uncertainty maybe, but which is statistically potentially relevant enough to do analysis on, right? From an aggregate level. I'm not entirely there yet. It's like this whole field. The idea started with the concept of differential privacy, which is basically the concept of introducing noise, but making statistically relevant enough for your analysis to kind of uphold. And since there's a bunch of libraries like Chance or Faker that actually allow you to do that, I can run it in a POC in my browser. But there's also like server-side libraries that kind of like allow you to say, whenever this package for this user goes out, replace the value XYZ by a synthetic variation that I'm going to render. Yeah. And so that's a concept I'm playing with. Yeah, that's a super interesting idea. I think definitely that's a topic worth discussing at Superweek. Next year. I'm also guessing that people looking at the live stream might be interested, in this topic. Like, so we should probably open this up, make this a broader discussion. I think your slides from
your MeasureCamp presentation are available online, right?
Yeah, they're online. They're on my. I'll reshare them later through LinkedIn again.
Yeah. So we'll make sure that all those resources and relevant links are shared, because I think, like you said, this is an ID that's developing. I think IP address, like the first thing that came to mind with me was like, okay, that will mess up with all the geo lookup stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. The question is like, if you know 75% and I'm taking 75%, like it's a random factor that I now have enabled, right? I'm not a statistician. There's smarter people to tell me out there what the threshold should be, but it's representative, right? Because you could still like, okay, I have a distribution of geolocations, 75% of them is correct.
Yeah.
The rest is scrambled. Is that enough for me to make decisions on that and to activate my data in one way or another? Because there's also, I think, a difference between like if you needed to personalize, like in that case, it wouldn't really work, because I'm not going to tell you like the weather is amazing in London while you're actually like, you don't live in London, right?
Yeah.
But your IP got scrambled. Versus I want to do aggregate analysis to figure out what the trend is within my platform or within my product, or et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. So it boils down to these boring but very true questions of, first deciding what you want to do with the data before you decide on the technology and the infrastructure you're going to use to actually do that.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have to still apply the basics, unfortunately, also in 2024, not only cool technology. I like the idea. I think it's definitely, it has merit. Are there any, so you mentioned 2 open source libraries, I think. Are there any other things, like any companies, people, technologies, things that are active in this space, or things you think people should look at if they're interested in this?
There's a very interesting article, which is like maybe not entirely related, but a bit, written by like Jonathan Mendes, which came out 2 weeks ago, which is called, I'm reading the title, Data Cleanrooms, Feature, Product, or Platform on the newsletter Source of Truth, which for the very first time kind of connects all of the concepts. So he has very clear definitions and super simple. I think he did it really well, because we're too deep to give clean definitions, I feel sometimes. We're trying to bundle everything. But he's focusing on what's the core of first-party data, what's the core of CDPs, what was the core of DMPs, and what's the core of data cleanrooms. And for the very first time in the lecture, I have been finding like on blogs that people in our industry read, like synthetic data comes in as a reference to how data cleanrooms are anonymizing stuff. So I'm expecting it to pop up more. Data cleanrooms from an advertising space or a media space are growing, let's say. There's more interest, especially with the focus on first-party data. You also see different parties like data warehouse providers or cloud providers like buying or building data cleanroom capabilities. So there's definitely something going on there. And he explicitly makes reference for the very first time, at least that I've seen, towards synthetic data usage there. So there's definitely something going on. So I would recommend everybody to read that article, even if it is just to refresh all of the concepts and see the clear relationship between all of them. Yeah,
that sounds like a great article to read. So we'll make sure to share all of that. Glenn, I wanna thank you for calling in, for being the first non-Superweek attendee on Superweek TV. And awesome. Hopefully next year you'll be here in the studio and
next year for the whole. That would be amazing.
Great. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, and we'll talk later.
Thank you very much.
See ya.
Have fun. Ciao, ciao.